So, what if you can sleep, but only at a later time than your life demands? That's not insomnia. Formally, it's called circadian rhythm sleep wake disorder, delayed sleep phase type. Yes, that is the whole title of the disorder. And there's a lot of people who think they have insomnia and they actually have delayed sleep phase, and I will be calling it delayed sleep phase kind of from here forward. So I wanted to make this video to answer some of the most common questions that people have about this surprisingly prevalent, but certainly not very well understood sleep disorder. So the questions I'm going to cover in this video are: what are the common symptoms of delayed sleep phase? How common is delayed sleep phase? What causes delayed sleep phase? How is delayed sleep phase diagnosed? How to fix delayed sleep phase? How do blue light blocking glasses help? What medication is used for delayed sleep phase? And finally, can delayed sleep phase be cured? So delayed sleep phase is a sleep disorder, and underneath the umbrella of sleep disorders, we have these things called circadian rhythm disorders, and delayed sleep phase is one of them. So they're all just a little different in how they present, but what they all have in common is you have the ability to sleep, just not at times that work for your life. So the timing is really the primary issue here. So before we get into the questions, I wanted to give a really quick little primer on the human circadian rhythm. So humans have these different types of biological rhythms or cycles of varying lengths that we go through over and over throughout the day, throughout the month, throughout our lives. So things like cycles of hunger and fullness, the sleep-wake cycle, the menstrual cycle, those are all examples of biological rhythms. So the word circadian means about a day, and a circadian rhythm is a cycle that takes about a day to complete, approximately 24 hours. So your sleep-wake cycle, that is on a circadian rhythm. And your circadian rhythm determines the timing of when your body prefers to sleep and prefers to wake up. So I actually did a deep dive into the circadian rhythm and circadian rhythm disorder. So I will link that video up top if you'd like to go check that out. But let's get into the questions. So first question, what are the common symptoms of delayed sleep phase? So a typical adult is going to fall asleep sometime between 10 and 11 p.m. and wake up sometime between 6 and 7 a.m. And then some people skew a little later, let's say 1 to 2 hours later. We might say these people are a little delayed, but not to the point that we're calling it a disorder. Then we have people who cannot, no matter what they do, fall asleep any earlier than 1 a.m., and it might be much later, and really struggle no matter what they do to wake up any earlier than 9 a.m., and it might be much later. Now we're knocking on disorder territory. Also, delayed sleep phase tends to be a long-standing, if not lifelong, pattern of sleeping on a later schedule. So somebody with delayed sleep phase, they will sleep well if they could just sleep on their preferred later schedule. That's how we know it's not insomnia. They have the ability to sleep, just not at conventional times. So if your life allows you to keep that later schedule, then we don't necessarily call it a disorder. Some people will take jobs where they can work later hours. But if your life dictates you keep more conventional hours, well, now we might have a problem. So some of you might be thinking, you've just described my teenager. Are you saying that all teenagers have a sleep disorder? Not necessarily. Your circadian rhythm does delay as you get into adolescence and adulthood. But the question here is really, can they manage? So yeah, maybe your teen is not bright-eyed and bushy-tailed in the morning, but can she muddle through? Can she kind of muddle through and like make it to school, even if she's getting there right as the bell rings? Versus if you've got somebody who's had to quit school or they can't keep a job because they just cannot get out of bed in the morning, that might be disorder territory. So with delayed sleep phase, you're going to see extreme sluggishness in the morning. And then the person is going to get more alert as the day progresses, and they're really going to come alive in the evening. So these people often think they have insomnia because it does take them a long time to fall asleep. And also, it is possible to develop insomnia on top of a pre-existing delayed sleep phase. So one doesn't preclude the other. You can certainly have both. But if your sleep problem can be fixed just by sleeping later hours, that is not insomnia. So to summarize, we are looking for a long-standing, if not lifelong pattern of inability to fall asleep and wake up at conventional times, and it's adversely affecting the person's life. Next question, how common is delayed sleep phase? Well, based on my research, which was mostly a cursory Google search and pulling sources from things like PubMed and places like that. So it's estimated that roughly 0.17% to 1.7% of the general adult population has delayed sleep phase. If we're just looking at adolescents and young adults, that number goes up somewhere between 3 and 16%, which I know is a pretty big range. There's inconsistency in how it's measured. It seems to affect males and females equally, does seem to run in families. And it's estimated that somewhere between 5 and 10% of people seeking help for insomnia actually have delayed sleep phase. Next question, what causes delayed sleep phase? So your circadian rhythm is partly related to your age and partly related to your genetics. So most people are going to sleep later and wake later when they're in adolescence and young adulthood, and then just shift earlier and earlier as they age. But people with delayed sleep phase will usually say they have been night owls their whole life and they don't age out of it. Also, another thing to know, you know how I said the human circadian rhythm was approximately 24 hours? So the average is like 24.3. People with delayed sleep phase have a slightly longer rhythm. Theirs often is more like 24.6. So their day is just ever so slightly, just a little bit longer than the average. There's also, as when we're looking at causes, I'm not going to get too much in the weeds here, but there are mutations in specific genes involved in the timing of things like melatonin release and stuff that impacts your circadian rhythm. But I am going to talk about two biological processes here that are really key to the timing of when you fall asleep and when you wake up. We call them DILMO and TMEN. So DILMO, this stands for dim light melatonin onset. This is your particular time in the evening when your brain starts to produce melatonin. It's different times for different people, and we all will tend to fall asleep 1 to 2 hours following the dim light melatonin onset. So people with delayed sleep phase, they tend to have a later dim light melatonin onset. Theirs is usually after 10 p.m. And then also TMIN, this means temperature minimum. So this is the timing of when your body temperature is hitting its lowest point in a 24-hour period. We tend to wake up 2 to 3 hours after our temperature minimum. So people with delayed sleep phase, they often have a later temperature minimum. So your day is just a little bit longer than other people's. And like the actual like biological timing of when you fall asleep and when you wake up, that is later than other people's. So next question. How is delayed sleep phase diagnosed? Well, primarily with an interview and at least 2 weeks of having somebody track their sleep. So a sleep study is really overkill for diagnosing a circadian phase delay. So I'm actually thinking about doing a video about sleep studies, what they measure, when they're helpful, when they're not. So if that sounds useful, please let me know in the comments. But sleep studies are expensive, they're time consuming, and they just don't generally measure what needs to be measured to diagnose a phase delay. So I diagnose it by trying to ask the right questions and then having somebody track their sleep for at least 2 weeks. So the section where I went over all the symptoms, those are all the questions I asked. That's what I'm looking for. And then I'll review the sleep log where somebody's tracking what time they fall asleep and what time they wake up. I'm looking for those times to be like much later than average. And I'm also looking for somebody to sleep better if they can sleep on a later schedule. Now, I think I may have mentioned earlier that it is possible to develop insomnia on top of a phase delay, so you can have both. So it can start with this inability to fall asleep early. That starts to impact your life. There's the phase delay. Then you start stressing about it and frantically trying to fix it. And eventually your brain starts to pair bed with alertness rather than sleep. And now you can't fall asleep no matter what time you go to bed because you're so stressed about it and there's so much pressure to sleep. There's the insomnia. So I treat the insomnia first before I work on the phase delay. So next question, how do you fix delayed sleep phase? Well, kind of like I said earlier, your circadian rhythm is partly related to your age, but genetics are also involved. So it's somewhat changeable, but somewhat not changeable because we're dealing with genetics. So I do have people who will just adjust their lives to fit their schedule. They will work at restaurants, bars, second shift at the hospital, some line of work where they just don't have to get up super early. And if you can do that and you can make that work, then that's totally fine. A lot of people do that, but not everybody has that option. So for those people, there is a protocol for shifting your sleep phase to an earlier schedule using mostly light and sometimes melatonin. So my process is to have somebody track their sleep for at least 2 weeks and as best they can, try to go to bed and get up based on what their body seems to want to do. I want it to try to be as close to your natural rhythm as we can get it. Then I look at all the data, calculate an average. What's the average time you fall asleep? What's the average time you wake up? We set that as your bedtime and wake time. We keep that for a few days, and then we walk you back a little bit at a time until we get you to where you want to go. I'm also giving recommendations along the way about when do you get light, when do you avoid light, when do you take melatonin. If we're using that, not everyone's appropriate for melatonin. Now, it's worth keeping in mind that we are not permanently changing your circadian rhythm because it's at least in part genetically determined. I liken it to coloring your hair. So it's kind of like if I decided I wanted to be a blonde. I could go to a salon, I could pay somebody some money, they could color my hair, they could make it look blonde, but I'm not really a blonde, I'm really a brunette. And those roots are going to come back at some point, and I'm going to have to keep touching them up if I want to continue to be a blonde. So if you have delayed sleep phase, your brain is probably always going to want to delay. And sometimes people will feel like they're having to really stay on top of it and keep up the new schedule. It might be for the foreseeable future, is what I tell people. Next question. How do blue light blocking glasses help with delayed sleep phase? So I recommend blue light blocking glasses for all of my people with delayed sleep phase. So the lenses should be orange or red or amber in color. Clear ones aren't going to cut it. I think there's some black ones that are like for cataracts. Don't get those. Orange, red, amber lenses. And I'll tell people to put them on a couple of hours before bedtime is usually what we do. And also put them on if you have to get up overnight for any length of time, but not any other time. You want light earlier in the day. Blue light is not inherently bad. It's really a question of timing. It can be helpful or it can be harmful depending on the timing of when you're getting the blue light. What medication is used for delayed sleep phase syndrome? So the primary tool that we use for shifting somebody's rhythm is light, but melatonin can also be used. I wrote a blog post about melatonin. I'm going to link that below, but I'll briefly kind of let people know that melatonin will not induce sleep. It is not going to knock you out. It's not going to induce sleep, but it can help you sleep at an earlier time. Sometimes sleep aids, prescription sleep aids are given to help people fall asleep. I don't think that's a great long-term solution. I think they're kind of just masking the problem. Some of that could be my bias because I'm more of a kind of behavioral person. But as far as medications go, that's usually what we're doing. And then the last question is, can delayed sleep phase syndrome be cured? And the answer to that is not really. You might age out of it if you're a teen or a 20-something, but that is not guaranteed. I have had older clients, I have had elderly clients who are delayed. So it's no guarantee that you're going to be early bird just because you're older. So really, you either mold your life around it if you're able to do that, or you do some work to shift your schedule, the timing of when you fall asleep and wake up, with the idea that you are going to have to keep it up. So that's all I have for today. I really hope this was helpful. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe for more sleep content. I put a video out about every other week, and hope you have a good rest of the day.